This document provides a comprehensive analysis of what became known as the Terran Incident, a catastrophic miscalculation by the Zephyrian hegemony that fundamentally altered the balance of power in the Outer Rim territories and established humanity as an unexpected variable in galactic politics. The incident began as a routine subjugation protocol and ended with the complete dissolution of a 1,000-year-old empire, serving as a stark reminder that technological superiority alone cannot account for the unpredictable nature of adaptive intelligence. The events detailed herein span approximately 18 standard months, from initial contact through the establishment of the Terran Galactic Accords. What makes this case particularly significant is not merely the defeat of a superior force, but the methodology by which it was accomplished, a perfect demonstration of how psychological warfare, technological improvisation, and what humans term thinking outside the box can overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. Background: the Zephyrian hegemony. For over a millennium, the Zephyrian hegemony had represented the pinnacle of technological achievement in the galaxy's outer spiral arms. Their empire encompassed 47 star systems, controlling trade routes that connected the inner core worlds to the resource-rich frontier territories. The Zephyrians themselves were a remarkable species, tall, ethereally beautiful beings with translucent skin that seemed to glow with an inner light, possessing lifespans that stretched across several human generations and intellectual capabilities that had produced some of the galaxy's most sophisticated technologies. Their society was built upon the foundation of what they called predictive dominance, a philosophical and technological framework that combined advanced quantum computing with deep psychological analysis to create models so accurate that they could predict the behavior of entire civilizations with remarkable precision. This system had never failed them. Every species they had encountered, from the warrior poet Voldronians to the hive-minded collective of Xeris, had responded exactly as their models predicted. Resistance was calculated, rebellion was anticipated, and submission was inevitable. The Zephyrian fleet that approached Sol system in the winter of 2386 was not their largest. That honor belonged to the armada that had subjugated the Andromedan Commonwealth 3 centuries prior. However, it was arguably their most sophisticated, the flagship Inevitable. Conclusion alone carried computational power equivalent to Earth's entire digital infrastructure, and its weapons systems could theoretically crack a planet's crust with a single sustained blast. Accompanying it were 12 heavy cruisers, 36 frigates, and a support fleet that included specialized vessels for what the Zephyrians euphemistically termed cultural integration. Admiral Thisvelandra, commander of the expedition, had spent the better part of a decade studying humanity through long-range observation and data collection. Her analysis seemed thorough and conclusive. Humans were a chaotic, short-lived species prone to internal conflict and technological stagnation. They had achieved interplanetary travel, but had made little progress beyond their home system. Their military capabilities were primitive, their political structures fragmented, and their psychological profiles suggested they would respond to overwhelming force with either immediate surrender or futile, easily crushed resistance. The predictive dominance algorithms gave humanity a 0.3% chance of meaningful resistance lasting longer than 6 standard months. Even that figure was considered generous by most military analysts. The plan, technological supremacy, and psychological manipulation. The Zephyrian approach to subjugation had been refined over centuries of successful campaigns. It was, in their view, both humane and efficient, a careful balance of overwhelming demonstration of power, coupled with precisely calculated psychological pressure, designed to minimize casualties while ensuring complete compliance. Phase 1 involved the deployment of what they called presence projectors, massive devices that could manipulate electromagnetic fields across an entire planet. When activated, these devices would cause every electronic system on Earth to display the same message simultaneously, a detailed explanation of humanity's new status within the hegemony, complete with historical precedents, benefits of compliance, and consequences of resistance. The message would be accompanied by a holographic display visible in the sky above every major population center, showing the Zephyrian fleet in formation around Earth's moon. Phase 2 would demonstrate their technological capabilities through carefully orchestrated displays of power. Weather patterns would be modified to create perfectly geometric cloud formations. Tidal forces would be subtly altered to cause synchronized waves on every ocean simultaneously. Most dramatically, they would temporarily disable Earth's magnetic field for exactly 1 hour and 37 minutes, long enough to be unmistakably artificial, but brief enough to cause no permanent damage. Phase 3 involved what the Zephyrians considered their masterstroke, the deployment of harmony inducers. These devices, positioned in Earth's upper atmosphere, would emit specific frequencies designed to interact with human neural chemistry. The effect would be subtle but profound, a gradual reduction in aggressive impulses and an increased tendency toward cooperative behavior. Resistance movements would find themselves inexplicably less motivated, while those advocating for peaceful integration would feel a growing sense of certainty about their position. The entire process was designed to take no more than 90 standard days. Historical precedent suggested that most species required between 30 and 60 days to reach complete psychological acceptance of their new status. Humanity, being particularly fractured politically and relatively primitive technologically, was expected to fall on the shorter end of that spectrum. Admiral Valandra had personally overseen similar operations 17 times over her 4-century career. She had never experienced anything resembling failure. First contact. When perfection meets chaos, the Zephyrian fleet achieved its position around Luna on December 3, 2386, at precisely 14:27 Universal Coordinated Time. The presence projectors activated on schedule, and every screen on Earth, from massive public displays in Times Square to the smallest personal devices, flickered and displayed the carefully crafted message of submission. The holographic fleet appeared in Earth's sky exactly as planned, visible even in daylight and impossible to ignore. For approximately 4 hours and 23 minutes, the plan proceeded flawlessly. The initial human response fell well within predicted parameters. There was widespread panic, certainly, but also significant portions of the population who immediately began advocating for peaceful surrender. World leaders convened emergency sessions. Military commanders assessed the hopelessness of their situation, and religious leaders proclaimed everything from the end times to the beginning of a new golden age. The Zephyrian observers noted with satisfaction that several major nations had already begun drafting preliminary acceptance documents. Then Dr. Sarah Chen changed everything. Dr. Chen was a 34-year-old quantum physicist working at CERN who had been in the middle of calibrating equipment for a routine experiment when the presence projectors activated. What made her response unique was not her intelligence, though she was undoubtedly brilliant, but her reaction to the technological display she witnessed. While most of humanity either cowered in fear or marveled at the aliens' obvious superiority, Dr. Chen felt something entirely different: curiosity about the mechanisms behind the demonstration. Within hours of the initial contact, she had gathered a small team of colleagues and begun analyzing the electromagnetic signatures left by the presence projectors. What she discovered would later be called the Chen observation: the fact that the Zephyrian technology, while incredibly advanced, was operating on principles that were not fundamentally alien to human understanding. More importantly, she realized that the very sophistication of their systems might contain exploitable weaknesses. The Zephyrians had built their technology to be perfect, which meant it was also predictable. Their quantum processors operated with mathematical precision, their energy distribution followed optimized patterns, and their communication networks maintained constant synchronization across the entire fleet. To the Zephyrians, this represented the height of technological achievement. To Dr. Chen, it represented a single point of failure waiting to be discovered. While world leaders debated surrender terms and military commanders planned desperate final stands, Dr. Chen sent a single encrypted message to colleagues at research institutions around the world. They're not gods. They're engineers. And engineers always leave blueprints in their work. The unexpected variable, human ingenuity under pressure, what Admiral Valandra could not have anticipated, because it fell outside every behavioral model in the Zephyrian database, was the specific way humans respond to existential threats. While most species either surrendered to superior force or fought with predictable desperation, humans possessed a unique psychological trait that the Zephyrians had never encountered: the ability to completely reframe a problem when conventional solutions proved inadequate. Dr. Chen's insight spread through the scientific community with remarkable speed. Within 72 hours of first contact, research teams on 6 continents had identified multiple aspects of Zephyrian technology that could potentially be exploited. The key breakthrough came from an unlikely source: Dr. James Martinez, a graduate student in computer science at MIT, who made a connection that would prove devastating to the Zephyrian plans. Martinez realized that the harmony inducers designed to pacify human resistance through neural frequency manipulation were operating on a feedback loop system. They continuously monitored human brain activity across the planet and adjusted their output accordingly. This real-time adaptation was meant to ensure maximum effectiveness, but it also created a vulnerability. If enough humans could simultaneously generate the right kind of neural pattern, they could potentially overload the system. The pattern they needed to generate was complex, a specific combination of focused concentration, creative problem-solving, and what Martinez termed aggressive optimism. It was, essentially, the exact mental state that humans naturally achieved when working on challenging problems they believed they could solve. The irony was exquisite. The very mental state the harmony inducers were designed to suppress was also the key to disabling them. Within a week of first contact, a global network of researchers, engineers, students, and volunteers had organized what they called Project Mindstorm. At precisely 18 o'clock UTC on December 12, over 40 million humans around the world simultaneously engaged in intensive problem-solving exercises while maintaining a state of determined optimism about defeating the alien technology, the harmony inducers. Suddenly faced with a coordinated neural pattern they had never encountered and were not designed to process, experienced cascading failures across all atmospheric installations. The feedback surge was so intense that it briefly disrupted the quantum processors aboard the Zephyrian flagship. For the first time in over 1,000 years, a Zephyrian plan had not merely failed, it had been actively countered by the very beings it was meant to control. The escalation. When superior technology meets adaptive intelligence, Admiral Velandra's response to the failure of the harmony inducers was both swift and telling. Rather than retreat and reconsider her approach, she doubled down on the Zephyrian doctrine of technological supremacy. If subtle manipulation would not work, she would demonstrate the futility of resistance through overwhelming force. The Zephyrian fleet repositioned itself in Earth's upper atmosphere and began what they termed selective demonstration. Using precisely controlled antimatter weapons, they vaporized a series of uninhabited islands in Earth's oceans, each blast perfectly calibrated to be visible from multiple continents while causing no loss of human life. The message was clear. Continued resistance would force them to target more significant locations. The demonstrations had their intended effect on much of Earth's population and most of its governments. Surrender negotiations resumed with renewed urgency, and several nations publicly announced their intention to accept Zephyrian authority. However, the attacks also had an unintended consequence that Admiral Velandra's behavioral models had failed to predict. They provided Dr. Chen's growing network of collaborators with detailed sensor readings of Zephyrian weapons in action. The antimatter weapons used in the demonstrations were indeed far beyond human technological capability, but they operated according to principles that human physicists understood. More importantly, the energy signatures they produced during discharge revealed critical information about the power distribution systems aboard the Zephyrian vessels. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a plasma physicist from Barcelona who had joined the resistance network, made the crucial discovery. The Zephyrian ships maintained perfect energy efficiency by routing all power through a central distribution matrix aboard each vessel. This system was a masterpiece of engineering. It eliminated waste, optimized performance, and ensured that every system aboard the ship operated at peak capacity at all times. It also meant that if that central matrix could be disrupted even temporarily, an entire Zephyrian warship would be left completely powerless. The challenge, of course, was figuring out how to disrupt technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. The answer came from an unexpected source, Dr. Yuki Tanaka, a materials engineer from Tokyo, who realized that the Zephyrian approach to perfection contained a fatal flaw. The Zephyrians had optimized their technology so thoroughly that it had no tolerance for inefficiency or chaos. Their systems were designed to work perfectly under all anticipated conditions, but they had no redundancy, no backup protocols, and no ability to adapt to situations outside their operational parameters. They were, in Dr. Tanaka's words, too perfect to be practical. The solution the human resistance developed was elegantly simple in concept and fiendishly complex in execution. They would not try to match Zephyrian technology or overpower it through superior force. Instead, they would introduce chaos into systems that were designed to be perfectly ordered. The counterstrike chaos as a weapon, what became known as Operation Feedback, began on January 15, 2387, exactly 6 weeks after first contact. By this time, the Human Resistance Network had grown to include over 200,000 active participants across every continent, representing dozens of scientific disciplines and backed by resources quietly provided by governments that were publicly negotiating surrender while privately supporting any effort that might provide an alternative to subjugation. The operation relied on a principle that the Zephyrians had never encountered because no other species had been technologically sophisticated enough to implement it: the deliberate introduction of quantum uncertainty into stable systems. Human quantum computers, while primitive compared to Zephyrian technology, had one crucial advantage. They were designed to work with uncertainty and probability rather than absolute precision. This made them far less powerful than Zephyrian systems, but it also made them capable of generating what Dr. Chen termed productive chaos, randomized quantum states that could interfere with more sophisticated systems trying to maintain perfect order. The plan required precise coordination across the globe. At research facilities on every continent, teams of physicists and engineers had spent weeks jury-rigging equipment to generate synchronized quantum interference patterns. The patterns themselves were harmless. They carried no destructive energy and posed no direct threat to the Zephyrian ships. However, when combined and focused through Earth's ionosphere, they created a planet-wide field of quantum static that would make it impossible for the Zephyrian systems to maintain their perfect efficiency. Admiral Velandra detected the quantum interference almost immediately after it began, but her response revealed the limitation of predictive dominance when faced with truly novel tactics. Her computers identified the interference as an attack, but they could not determine its purpose or predict its effects because no species had ever used quantum chaos as a weapon before. The algorithms that had successfully predicted the behavior of 46 different civilizations had no framework for understanding human tactics. The first effects became apparent within minutes. Zephyrian communication systems, which relied on perfectly synchronized quantum entanglement across the fleet, began experiencing sporadic failures. Navigation computers calibrated for absolute precision started generating minor but accumulating errors. Most critically, the power distribution matrices that Dr. Vasquez had identified began struggling to maintain optimal efficiency in the face of constant quantum uncertainty. The Zephyrians responded by attempting to boost their signal clarity and increase their system's precision, but this only made the problem worse. The harder their technology worked to maintain perfect order, the more it was disrupted by the chaos field surrounding Earth. Within 6 hours, 3 Zephyrian frigates had experienced complete power failures. Within 12 hours, 2 heavy cruisers were running on emergency backup systems, and within 18 hours, the flagship Inevitable Conclusion itself was struggling with cascade failures across multiple critical systems. For the first time in their recorded history, the Zephyrians faced an enemy they could not predict, using weapons they did not understand, implementing tactics that should have been impossible. The human element. Psychology as technology. While Operation Feedback successfully demonstrated that Zephyrian technology could be disrupted, it did not immediately resolve the crisis. The quantum interference field required enormous amounts of energy to maintain, and human resources were not unlimited. More importantly, the Zephyrians still possessed overwhelming firepower advantage. Even with reduced efficiency, their weapons could still devastate Earth if Admiral Velandra chose to use them. What happened next illustrated another uniquely human characteristic that had never appeared in Zephyrian behavioral models: the ability to turn weakness into strength through creative reinterpretation. Dr. Michael Foster, a psychologist from the University of Edinburgh who had been studying Zephyrian communications intercepts, made an observation that would prove as crucial as any technological breakthrough. The Zephyrians, he noted, were showing signs of something their behavioral models said they were incapable of experiencing: genuine confusion and uncertainty. For over a millennium, the Zephyrians had lived in a universe where their predictive dominance gave them effective omniscience within their sphere of influence. They always knew what would happen next because their models told them. They had never experienced true uncertainty, and their psychological frameworks had no mechanism for processing it. Dr. Foster realized that the quantum interference field was not just disrupting Zephyrian technology, it was disrupting their fundamental understanding of reality. A species that had built their entire civilization around predictability was suddenly facing a completely unpredictable opponent. This insight led to the development of what became known as psychological asymmetric warfare, a systematic campaign designed not to defeat the Zephyrians militarily, but to convince them that victory was impossible because humans could not be predicted or controlled. The campaign began with a series of carefully orchestrated communications sent directly to the Zephyrian fleet. These messages were not threats or demands, but rather detailed explanations of human psychological principles that made no sense within Zephyrian frameworks. Humans, the messages explained, did not respond to stimuli in predictable ways because human behavior was influenced by factors the Zephyrians had never considered: individual creativity, cultural mythology, personal relationships, and the capacity to find meaning in apparently meaningless situations. The messages included detailed descriptions of human behaviors that seemed impossible to Zephyrian observers: soldiers sacrificing themselves for abstract ideals, scientists pursuing research with no practical application, artists creating beauty in the face of destruction, and ordinary people finding reasons to laugh even while facing existential threats. Each message was accompanied by real-time demonstrations. While maintaining the quantum interference field that was crippling Zephyrian systems, humans around the world engaged in activities that appeared completely irrational by Zephyrian standards but made perfect sense within human psychological frameworks. In New York, flash mobs gathered in Central Park to perform synchronized dances while the Zephyrian fleet loomed overhead. In London, street musicians gave concerts in defiance of evacuation orders. In Tokyo, children drew chalk pictures of flowers on sidewalks while their parents constructed improvised quantum computers in their basements. To Admiral Velandra, these behaviors were not just unpredictable, they were impossible. Her models suggested that a species facing extinction should either fight with desperate efficiency or surrender to preserve themselves. The idea that humans would spend their final hours creating art, making music, and engaging in apparently purposeless social activities was so far outside Zephyrian understanding that it broke their behavioral analysis algorithms entirely. The Philosophical Crisis When Omniscience Meets Mystery by February 2387. Admiral Valandra faced a situation that no Zephyrian commander had encountered in over 1,000 years: complete strategic uncertainty. Her fleet remained technologically superior to anything humans possessed, but technological superiority was proving meaningless against opponents who refused to behave according to any predictable pattern. The quantum interference field continued to degrade Zephyrian systems, but attempts to counter it led to increasingly paradoxical results. Every time the Zephyrians adapted their technology to account for human tactics, the humans adapted their tactics to exploit the new adaptations. It was as if they were fighting an opponent who grew stronger through defeat and more creative under pressure. More disturbing to Admiral Velandra was her growing realization that her own psychological framework was being challenged by prolonged exposure to human unpredictability. Zephyrian society was built around the comfort of certainty, knowing that their models could predict and control any situation. Facing humans had introduced her to concepts she had never experienced: doubt, frustration, and something approaching what humans would recognize as creative desperation. The breaking point came when Dr. Chen's research network achieved what they called cascade amplification. By networking quantum computers across the globe and coordinating their outputs through carefully timed social media posts, they had created a planet-wide system that could generate quantum interference patterns of unprecedented complexity. The interference field became self-modifying, adapting in real time to Zephyrian countermeasures and generating new forms of chaos faster than even advanced Zephyrian computers could analyze. For the first time in their history, the Zephyrians faced a situation where their technology was not just outmaneuvered but actively countered by systems they considered primitive. The realization that humans could take inferior technology and use it more effectively than the Zephyrians could use their superior systems represented a fundamental challenge to everything their civilization believed about the nature of intelligence and technological progress. Admiral Valandra's final log entry before requesting permission to withdraw from Earth system read, "The humans possess a form of intelligence that our models cannot account for. They do not simply solve problems. They redefine problems to make them solvable. They do not simply adapt to circumstances. They adapt circumstances to suit their needs. Most disturbing, they seem to grow more effective as resistance becomes more difficult. I cannot predict their next action because I cannot understand their decision-making process. I cannot control their behavior because they appear to thrive on the very chaos that our control systems are designed to eliminate. Recommend immediate withdrawal and reclassification of humanity as an uncontainable variable." The resolution. Strength through acknowledged weakness. The Zephyrian withdrawal from Earth system occurred on March 22, 2387, exactly 109 days after first contact. However, the story did not end with their departure. Admiral Valandra's superiors, upon reviewing her reports, made a decision that surprised even the humans who had orchestrated their defeat. They requested a formal diplomatic meeting. The Zephyrian High Council had spent the better part of a month analyzing the reports from Earth system, and their conclusion represented a fundamental shift in their understanding of intelligence and technology. They realized that their millennium of success had been built on a foundation that was both their greatest strength and their most critical weakness: the assumption that superior technology inevitably led to superior outcomes. Humans had demonstrated that this assumption was false. More than that, they had shown that there were forms of intelligence and problem-solving capability that could not be quantified, predicted, or replicated through technological advancement. The Zephyrians found themselves in the unique position of facing opponents who had defeated them, not by matching their capabilities, but by making their capabilities irrelevant. The diplomatic meetings, held aboard a neutral space station in the Alpha Centauri system, lasted for 6 standard months and resulted in what became known as the Terran Galactic Accords. The agreements established humanity as a protected species with full autonomy over their home system, but more importantly, they created a new framework for interspecies relations based on what the Accords termed acknowledged asymmetry, the recognition that different forms of intelligence might be incomparable rather than hierarchical. The Accords included provisions for technological exchange, but on a voluntary basis that respected the fundamental differences between human and Zephyrian approaches to problem solving. The Zephyrians would share their advanced manufacturing and energy technologies, while humans would provide insights into adaptive problem solving and what the Accords formally recognized as productive chaos theory, the systematic application of controlled uncertainty to generate novel solutions. Perhaps most significantly, the Accords established the principle that technological superiority did not grant the right to impose control over other species. This principle, which came to be known as the human doctrine, fundamentally altered the balance of power throughout the galaxy and established precedents that would influence interspecies relations for centuries to come. Analysis: the paradox of strength through weakness. The Terran incident represents a case study in what military historians have termed asymmetric victory through acknowledged inferiority. The humans did not defeat the Zephyrians by matching their technological capabilities or overwhelming them with superior force. Instead, they won by making their own weaknesses into strengths and turning Zephyrian strengths into vulnerabilities. The key insights that emerged from the incident can be summarized in several principles that have since become fundamental to interspecies diplomatic doctrine. First, technological superiority does not guarantee strategic superiority when facing opponents who operate according to different logical frameworks. The Zephyrians possessed objectively superior technology, but their reliance on that technology became a weakness when faced with opponents who could exploit its predictability. Second, adaptability can overcome optimization when environmental conditions exceed design parameters. Zephyrian systems were optimized for perfect efficiency, but this optimization made them vulnerable to chaos. Human systems were less efficient but more adaptable, allowing them to function in conditions that completely disabled Zephyrian technology. Third, psychological factors can be as decisive as technological ones in determining the outcome of conflicts between intelligent species. The Zephyrians' psychological dependence on predictability made them vulnerable to opponents who could introduce genuine uncertainty into strategic situations. Fourth, collective intelligence can emerge from the coordination of individual capabilities in ways that exceed the sum of their parts. The Human Resistance Network achieved computational and strategic capabilities that no individual human possessed by coordinating diverse skills and perspectives across a global network. Finally, the capacity to reframe problems can be more valuable than the ability to solve them within existing frameworks. Humans consistently avoided direct confrontation with Zephyrian strengths by changing the terms of engagement to favor human capabilities. These principles have been incorporated into the standard protocols for interspecies contact and have influenced diplomatic doctrine throughout the galaxy. The Terran incident demonstrated that intelligence is not hierarchical but multidimensional, and that apparent weaknesses can become decisive advantages under the right circumstances. The transformation from defeat to integration. The months following the establishment of the Terran Galactic Accords saw unprecedented changes in both human and Zephyrian societies. For humanity, the successful resistance against overwhelming technological superiority provided a sense of confidence and capability that transformed their approach to galactic politics. Earth became a center for what was termed alternative solution research, attracting scientists and philosophers from throughout the galaxy who were interested in studying human approaches to problem solving. Dr. Sarah Chen, whose initial observations had sparked the resistance, established the Institute for Productive Chaos Theory at a new campus built jointly by human and Zephyrian engineers. The institute became a premier center for research into adaptive intelligence and unconventional problem-solving methodologies. Its work influenced everything from interstellar navigation systems to diplomatic protocols, demonstrating that the principles discovered during the Resistance had applications far beyond military conflict. For the Zephyrians, the defeat represented both a crisis and an opportunity for growth. Admiral Velandra, rather than being censured for her failure, was promoted to head a new division focused on understanding what they termed non-linear intelligence. Her experiences with human unpredictability had given her insights that proved valuable in subsequent encounters with other species whose behaviors did not fit traditional Zephyrian models. The most significant change in Zephyrian society was the gradual integration of uncertainty and adaptability into their technological and philosophical frameworks. While they maintained their mastery of predictive modeling and technological optimization, they began developing what they called chaos-compatible systems, technologies designed to function effectively in uncertain or rapidly changing environments. This technological evolution led to breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved independently. Zephyrian precision combined with human adaptability produced innovations in fields ranging from quantum computing to interstellar communication. The partnership demonstrated that different approaches to intelligence were not competing alternatives but complementary capabilities that could be combined for mutual benefit. Legacy. The enduring impact of acknowledged limitation. The Terran incident's influence extended far beyond the immediate participants. Word of humanity's successful resistance spread throughout the galaxy, inspiring other species to reconsider their relationships with technologically superior civilizations. The human doctrine became a rallying point for smaller civilizations seeking to maintain their autonomy in the face of imperial expansion. More importantly, the incident established precedents for peaceful resolution of conflicts between species with asymmetric capabilities. The recognition that different forms of intelligence could be incomparable rather than hierarchical led to the development of new diplomatic frameworks based on mutual respect rather than technological dominance. The principle of acknowledged limitation became central to these new frameworks. Rather than denying their weaknesses or attempting to match their opponent's strengths, species learned to openly acknowledge their limitations while simultaneously identifying how those limitations might be transformed into advantages under specific circumstances. This principle proved particularly valuable in subsequent first contact situations. Species encountering each other for the first time began approaching these meetings not as competitions to establish dominance, but as opportunities to discover new forms of intelligence and capability. The question shifted from who is stronger to how are we different, and how might our differences be mutually beneficial. The Institute for Productive Chaos Theory became a model for similar institutions throughout the galaxy, each focused on studying and developing alternative approaches to intelligence and problem-solving. These institutes formed networks that facilitated the exchange of ideas and methodologies between species, creating a galactic community based on intellectual diversity rather than technological hierarchy. Conclusion. The man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others. The title of this analysis refers to a human philosophical concept that proved central to understanding their successful resistance against the Zephyrian hegemony. The phrase suggests that acknowledging and transcending one's limitations is the key to invulnerability, not because it eliminates weaknesses, but because it transforms the relationship between weakness and strength. Throughout the Terran incident, humans consistently demonstrated their willingness to acknowledge their technological inferiority, their military weakness, and their lack of experience with interstellar politics. Rather than allowing these acknowledgements to become sources of despair or resignation, they transformed them into strategic advantages by building their approach around working with and through their limitations rather than despite them. Dr. Chen's initial insight that the aliens were not gods, they were engineers, exemplified this principle. By acknowledging that she did not understand alien technology, while simultaneously recognizing that she did understand the principles underlying all technology, she was able to identify vulnerabilities that more arrogant opponents might have missed. The human resistance network's approach to coordinating global action, despite lacking centralized command, rather than attempting to create a traditional military hierarchy that could be targeted and disrupted, they acknowledged their lack of military infrastructure and built their organization around civilian networks and voluntary cooperation. Most fundamentally, humanity's willingness to acknowledge that they could not predict or control the outcome of their resistance allowed them to remain flexible and adaptive throughout the conflict. While the Zephyrians became increasingly rigid as their predictions failed, humans became increasingly creative as conventional approaches proved inadequate. The deeper meaning of the phrase extends beyond tactical considerations to encompass a philosophical approach to existence itself. By destroying his weak self, the individual does not eliminate weakness but transcends the fear and limitation that weakness typically imposes. This transcendence creates a form of strength that cannot be targeted or undermined by external opponents because it is based on acceptance rather than denial, flexibility rather than rigidity, and growth rather than preservation. In the context of the Terran incident, humanity as a species demonstrated this principle by refusing to be constrained by their objective inferiority in technology, firepower, or experience. Instead of trying to match Zephyrian capabilities in these areas, they acknowledged their limitations and found ways to make those limitations irrelevant to the conflict's outcome. The Zephyrians conversely became vulnerable precisely because they could not acknowledge the limitations of their approach. Their psychological and technological frameworks were built around the assumption of superiority and predictability. When faced with genuine uncertainty and acknowledged inferiority that had been transformed into strength, they had no resources to draw upon because their entire civilization was built around avoiding the experience of limitation and uncertainty. Epilogue. The continuing evolution. 5 years after the establishment of the Terran Galactic Accords, the galaxy looks fundamentally different than it did before first contact between humans and Zephyrians. The rigid hierarchies based on technological advancement have given way to more complex networks based on complementary capabilities and mutual respect. The Institute for Productive Chaos Theory has established branches on 47 worlds, each adapted to the specific forms of intelligence and problem-solving capabilities of local species. These institutes work together on challenges that no single species could address independently, from the development of faster-than-light communication systems to the exploration of alternate dimensional physics. Admiral Velandra, now Director of Nonlinear Intelligence for the former Zephyrian hegemony, has become one of humanity's closest alien allies. Her reports on human psychology and methodology have been instrumental in helping other species understand and work with human unpredictability. In a recent interview, she observed that the humans taught us that intelligence is not about having the right answers, but about asking questions that reveal new possibilities. Dr. Sarah Chen, now recognized as one of the galaxy's leading experts on adaptive intelligence, continues her research into the principles that made human resistance possible. Her latest work focuses on what she terms collaborative chaos, methodologies for coordinating diverse forms of intelligence to address challenges that exceed the capabilities of any single approach. The human world of Earth has become a pilgrimage site for young members of species throughout the galaxy who are interested in studying alternative approaches to intelligence and problem-solving. The planet's universities have established exchange programs that bring together some of the most creative minds from dozens of different species, creating an unprecedented environment for intellectual cross-pollination. Perhaps most significantly, the principles developed during the Terran incident have been applied to challenges far beyond military conflict. The same approaches that allowed humans to defeat technologically superior opponents have proven effective in addressing problems ranging from interstellar trade disputes to the exploration of scientific phenomena that defy conventional analysis. The phrase, "the man who destroys his weak self can never be destroyed by others," has been translated into hundreds of galactic languages and has become a central principle in the philosophical framework that guides interspecies cooperation. It serves as a reminder that true strength comes not from the absence of weakness, but from the courage to acknowledge limitation and the creativity to transform it into advantage. The Terran incident stands as proof that in a universe filled with diverse forms of intelligence, victory belongs not to the strongest or most advanced, but to those with the wisdom to understand their own nature and the creativity to make that nature into an asset. In acknowledging their weaknesses and building their strengths around those acknowledgements, humanity demonstrated a form of invulnerability that no amount of technological superiority could overcome. The galaxy is still learning the full implications of this lesson, but one thing has become clear: the future belongs not to those who seek to eliminate uncertainty and weakness, but to those who learn to thrive in their presence. In that sense, the Terran incident was not just humanity's victory over the Zephyrian hegemony, but the galaxy's victory over the limitations imposed by conventional thinking about intelligence, strength, and the nature of victory itself. The document concludes with a notation that has become standard in galactic historical archives. Remember that apparent weakness, fully acknowledged and creatively engaged, can become a form of strength that no external force can overcome. The humans prove this principle through their actions, and the galaxy continues to benefit from their example.